get Danny a few minutes first, though, and that is to, if you would, among the observations that hopefully you'll make here, is give us a bit of a sense of what this looks like from the Israeli perspective, a country that you've spent quite a bit of time on, obviously been involved in lots of diplomacy with the Palestinians. What I'm interested in is, and I think one of the things we're going to try to do tonight is disabuse as many of us here as possible of some of the one of the sort of the most basic caricatures of the issue. And one of those is that this is just about Israel. It's clearly not just about Israel. There's the United States interest that's very strong here. There's a very strong Arab interest. If you go to the Gulf today, there's a higher degree of paranoia among the Gulf countries than frankly in Israel about Iran, and a greater eagerness for a war, I might add, than you hear in Israel. But there is only one country where the debate is lively and at very senior levels about taking preemptive action, actually going and launching an unprovoked war, which is what it will look like from an international legal perspective, and striking at Iran's nuclear installations. And that obviously is Israel. Danny, give us a sense of perhaps where the Israeli mindset is on this, both on the part of the decision makers in the government, but I think also more broadly, because this will, and I think you agree with this, and disagree please if you don't, this is not just attacking Osirak in Iraq, this is not just hitting the Syrian installations, this would be a much more consequential decision on the part of the State of Israel. Give us a sense of the thinking there.
Thank you, Nader. And well, I came here thinking Mr. Dubitz has introduced the notion of this being a debate, and I came and thought, well, it's nice to do this in a non-debate format, because in the debate format, we're trying to get your vote, so you end up really focusing on how to ingratiate yourself with the audience, so someone can kind of leave it saying, I know he was kind of advocating World War III, but he was terribly lovely. So I came here with the intention of trying to be a thorough scourge, now that I don't have to be popular, but then I discovered that I really want to be invited back, because hip-hop, I mean, if Intelligent Square people, if you like me, I've always wanted to share a platform with rap artists, so I have my incentive now. I want to touch on the sanctions issue, or begin to touch on it in closing, but to look at what you brought up, Nader, and how does this look from Israel? I think in two important respects, the Israeli Prime Minister's position is something of an outlier within Israeli establishment elite circles. Now, he's the Prime Minister, and I'm looking forward to watching football tomorrow night, so he's in that decision-making role. First, though, in terms of the nature of the threat, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has been very forthright in defining this as an existential threat. You can run off a list of the most important military leaders, ex-heads of the Mossad, of the Israeli Defense Forces, who would say, no, it's not an existential threat, don't go there, it's self-defeating to go there. The head of the Shin Bet, Israel's internal security services, the immediate past head, Mr. Diskin, actually accused the Prime Minister of being messianist on this. I think that probably went too far. But Prime Minister Netanyahu does see it in these terms, and it's important to understand that. It's probably important to appreciate at the same time that in the past he's accused Shimon Peres, today's president, of being Chamberlain-esque appeaser over Oslo. He's talked about negotiating with Hamas as being like negotiating with Hitler, although he just did that for the release of an Israeli soldier. So that's important to understand his mindset. The former leader of the opposition, Madam Livni, has accused him of shamefully abusing the Holocaust. But if you fix the bar at Iran crossing a certain threshold, and the threshold for Mr. Netanyahu is in a different place, I think, to Washington. If you call that the equivalent of bombing the railroad tracks at Auschwitz, you're climbing yourself pretty high up a ladder, which is what the Prime Minister has done. The second thing then becomes, of course, what is the nature of the response? What is the nature of the action you take? And the idea of an Israeli military strike is very much led again by the Prime Minister and also by his Defense Minister. And again, you would have the heads, and especially the immediate past heads of the security establishment, disagreeing with him as to the efficacy and the wisdom of making such a move. I think the first important thing to recognize is the Israeli Prime Minister of politicians does not exist in some unique bubble where politics are irrelevant to him. He is a politician, he seeks to get re-elected, he's in a very good position to get re-elected, and there's politics that's part of this. In fact, I would argue that the politics argues against him taking military action because it's so risky when he's so shoe-in politically for re-election. He's right, his coalition allies from the further right are actually not hyping this threat. And I think for them, they see the focus on Iran as an excellent distraction from the Palestinian issue, for instance. So when can an Israeli prime minister visit Washington and not have the word Palestinian pass his lips? This is for his coalition, this is the achievement, actually, to have created this fantastic diversionary issue to a certain degree. And if you follow developments in Israel, and this may surprise people, if you poll Israelis, this is not the top of their agenda. I cannot recall, and I think anyone would be hard-pushed, to point to you a demonstration in which Israelis took to the streets to demand the dismantling of the Iranian suspected nuclear program, or demanding a military strike. The only public action I can remember on Iran was actually a rather cute and naive Facebook initiative called We Love Iran, which some I'm sure terribly charming Israelis undertook. Hundreds, if not thousands, were out yesterday demonstrating over moving some homes from one part of an illegal settlement to another part of an illegal settlement. They're not out demonstrating on this. Of course, the other aspect is, to what extent is he simply playing the role of bad cop? And here is where he is much closer to the consensus of the establishment in Israel, which is, we have to be the badasses in this. I slip into an American accent having spent too long in Washington. We have to hold the world's feet to the fire to enable Mr. Dubowitz to dial it up to Spinal Tap 11 by being so threatening. I think what has a lot of people asking questions as to what might happen soon is a sense that perhaps this is not a bad cop routine, but a rogue cop routine. And those are two very different things. A word on sanctions before you jump in, Nada. Look, what I just heard from Mr. Dubowitz is that so far the impact of having escalated sanctions is we've managed to secure cheaper oil reserves for China, and we've put ourselves in a position where, in order to not mess ourselves up economically even further, America is having to release its own strategic oil reserves and get the Saudis and others to do likewise, which is probably not something that is sustainable that long over time. I prefer not to hear the kind of hubris we heard from North America not so many years ago of accusing people of acting like four-year-olds in negotiations. I don't think that took us to good places in the past decade when that kind of hubris was put forward. And what I worry about, because I don't think you're going to sanction Iran into capitulating in a negotiation, because that's what we're actually talking about. And you don't think that either, because you've written that, Mr. Dubowitz. What you're talking about is really regime change. And what I'm worried about is that we end up finding ourselves where we were with Iraq in the 90s. And we should bear in mind how terrible the civilian suffering of the Iraqi population was under a brutal sanctions regime which also failed in its stipulated goal, which we later discovered was based on false intelligence anyway.
Danny, thank you.